Hello, everyone. Um, since we have Halloween coming up, and I just finished discussing antisocial personality disorder on my last vlog, I thought today we'd talk a little bit about some of the more well-known individuals that most of us assume have antisocial personality disorder, and just kind of talk a little bit about the variation we see in some of these people. I do want to put a trigger warning on here because I am going to talk about some of the famous serial killers that most of us have heard of. I'm not really going to get into the crimes. I'm more interested in the mental state. And I am going to mention antisocial personality disorder and borderline personality disorder, but please note that these are very extreme cases, and often there are more going on than just this particular diagnosis. I'm just going to focus more on the diagnosis that more drove the decisions the individual makes. And these individuals would be very high on the scale of psychopathy, whereas other individuals with antisocial personality disorder, or most individuals with borderline personality disorder, they're not high on that particular scale. And so they're not going to be like these individuals. So I just want to highlight we're looking at special cases here, and I'm by no means indicating that everybody with the diagnosis is this way. Most people with these diagnoses are actually not this way at all. You'll also notice that most of the individuals I talk about today are men. I did manage to find two women that I'm going to mention as well, but we know from research that men tend to be more physical in the actions they take, either out of anger or desperation, whereas women, we tend to be more verbal. And there's a lot of theories evolutionarily as to why that happens. There's a lot of other theories out there too. But a lot of the people that have been arrested for some horrendous crimes do end up being men because they are more likely to take those kinds of actions just based on how men and women typically act. Again, this is not saying that men are more likely to be, psychopaths than women, or that men are more likely to be more dangerous than women, just in general, if they have these diagnoses. Again, these are just special cases. So most of the time when we watch, say, a serial killer documentary or a true crime drama or something like that, we tend to assume, oh, these people must be all, they're all psychopaths, which in older terminology would have meant today the same as what we would call antisocial personality disorder with high psychopathic traits. And this kind of assumption leads us to expect certain things from these people. So obviously, they all did it for the same reasons, and they all had the same reaction to people around them, and we really kind of put them all in a very specific box. And I think by doing that, we really actually make it difficult for people to recognize some of the other traits they may have had might have also been red flags, but because they're not something we normally think of in terms of someone who may commit serial killings, we tend to let those go as the general public. So for example, I want to talk about, just to start it all off, probably one of the most infamous men in history, and that is Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler, in his mind, was doing what he thought was the right thing to do, which obviously it was not. But he also did something we call splitting, and that actually is more common with borderline personality disorder than antisocial personality disorder. Obviously therapists and psychologists can argue this for days. But in my particular perspective, I think he falls more along the borderline personality disorder range because he split people into the good people and the bad people. And people with antisocial personality disorder, they don't do that. The people don't matter to them enough to do that. They also think that Hitler had a good dose of narcissistic personality disorder in there too. So, he had traits from both feeding into what he chose to do. But I think one of his quotes that really shows this splitting behavior that we're talking about is when he stated that The stronger must dominate, not the weaker, which would signify the sacrifice of its own nature. Only the born weakling can look upon this principle as cruel, and if he does so, it is merely because he is feebler of nature and narrow-minded. Basically, he was saying, okay, his race is superior and should be breeding, and these other people, they're inferior, so we need to get rid of them. Antisocial personality disorder would only be focused on what served Hitler, but in Hitler's mind, what he was doing was kind of serving a greater purpose in his mind, kind of purifying races and that sort of thing. And he actually showed some, albeit twisted, self-denial when he stated that he was never going to marry because he was married to Germany. So he allowed himself to have a mistress, but he never got married until like, I think 2 days before he ended his life and that of his mistress. So you see some self-restraint, which is very unusual in antisocial personality disorder because there was no reason beyond his own self-imposed belief system that he actually kept up that self-restraint. So I would put him more in the borderline personality disorder category and throw in a dose of narcissism. I'm curious if anybody out there disagrees with me. Feel free to leave a comment. I'm curious. The next individual on my list that I wanted to chat about is Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, again, when we bring this individual to mind, everybody's like, oh, he was a psychopath. But, yes, he had very high psychopathic traits. But the motivation behind his crimes, he killed 17 men over a period of time, was that he did not want these individuals to leave him. So when they talked to him about his crimes, he said he could completely control a person, and especially a person who he found physically attractive, and keep them with him as long as possible. And to him, it was even good enough if he kept parts of that person. But then when he was talking about, when he's talking to police about what he did, he said, yes, he always had a sense that what he was doing was wrong, but he didn't think anyone could kill another person without recognizing that it was wrong, with, sensing that it was not right. And those types of statements, again, are not indicative of antisocial personality disorder. They're more indicative of borderline personality disorder because he had this desperate dislike of being left. And so he was doing anything he could to keep these individuals with him, to the point where he was trying to figure out how to make them mindless slaves so they would never leave him. And he also acknowledged when he was caught that what he did was wrong. And a lot of individuals with other personality disorders, and it's not just borderline, but I had to narrow it down or this video would go all day. When they're caught for whatever crimes they have committed, they'll often recognize that what they did was wrong, even if their motivation was to, satisfy some sort of need that they had. Whereas someone with antisocial personality disorder, they're not going to necessarily agree that what they did was actually wrong. And a good example of this is actually John Wayne Gacy, who never did confess to his crimes, even though they found bodies in his house. He was still insistent through his whole trial and all the way along that he did nothing wrong. And when they confronted him about the bodies in his house, his response was, well, I never should have been convicted of anything more serious than running a cemetery without a license. And so where most of us would be horrified that there were bodies in our house, or we would have some sort of feeling about it, Gacy's just kind of flippant, oh yeah, they were there. There's really no indication of any sort of special feeling about the individual that he had killed or anything along those lines. And Gacy ended up killing 33 men and boys over the course of his time as a serial killer. And still he refused to accept that he had done anything, even in the face of some pretty intense, pretty convincing, pretty damning proof. And that is something that is common with antisocial personality disorder, is that they can lie very easily and very convincingly, and they won't back down, even if you confront them with some of the most obvious evidence you'd ever seen. So you could convince or catch them and take a picture of them holding a knife over somebody after they've just killed, and they would still deny that that was them. They just will not change their point of view. So that is an example of someone who would be pretty much completely antisocial personality disorder. The other individual is Ted Bundy, who would qualify as, probably in my opinion anyway, antisocial personality disorder. And probably the most telling and probably the best description I've ever heard of antisocial personality disorder was one of the quotes that was listed for him. And he was talking in the third person here, but he says he should have recognized that what really fascinated him was the hunt, the adventure of searching out his victims, and to a degree possessing them physically as one would possess a potted plant or a painting or a Porsche, owning them as it were this individual. And so he saw people just as things, just as much as you would say, I don't know, pick carrots out of the ground, or like he refers to owning a person like owning a potted plant. He had no concept of humanity and how humanity is different from other things. And so when he was convicted, he didn't obviously show any remorse at all. And he actually showed that he believed everybody was like him. So, for example, he stated society wants to believe that it can identify evil people or even bad or harmful people, but it's just not practical because there are no stereotypes. So basically he's saying, kind of everybody has this nebulous right or wrong feeling that I have, and will do whatever they have to survive. And again, that's a very antisocial personality disorder statement to make. One could also argue these individuals would have a bit of a dose of narcissistic personality disorder as well. Again, curious what you guys think, if anybody has any comments or disagrees with me, because like I said, this is all my personal clinical opinion. One of the only female antisocial personality disorder individuals that I was able to find as I read through things was actually someone from a long time ago named Jane Topin. Now, if you Google female antisocial personality disorder, you're going to get quite a list of people. But the challenge is when you look a little deeper into some of the people they've listed there, they actually meet other criteria with a high level of psychopathy, as opposed to being completely antisocial personality disorder. But this one individual, based on what I was able to find on her or to read on her, she's one of the few women that fully fits an antisocial personality disorder. And she actually was found to have killed 31 people, unfortunately. And when she was asked why she did it, she said that, and I quote, "My ambition is to have killed more people, more helpless people than any man or woman who has ever lived." And that was it. There was no desire to keep people close to her. There was no desire to keep people from leaving. There was no splitting. She just wanted to kill more people than anybody ever had before. My guess is maybe there was some infamy that came with that, but beyond that, there was nothing that motivated her, which really puts her firmly in our antisocial personality disorder. An example of a borderline personality disordered female with high psychopathy would be Eileen Wuornos, and she's a little more familiar to probably most people. And, when she was killed or convicted of killing 6 men and suspected of killing 2 others. And we can really see the difference between her and Jane when she says, she didn't have to say, or as she would say, "I do have to say one thing. Their family must have realized that no matter how much they loved the people that died, no matter how much they loved them, they were bad people because they were going to hurt me." So here we see this splitting. She's identifying the Johns. She's identifying the men as being bad. She doesn't look at society as something to use. She looks at the men that she has killed as being completely evil or bad or needing to be killed. Another quote from her that really expresses this is, she says, "But whatever's beyond, I know it's going to be good because I didn't do anything wrong as they say I did. I did the right thing, and I saved a lot of people from getting hurt and raped and killed too." So in her mind, what she had done actually was in service of other individuals, that she had ended the lives of men who, in her mind, were horrible because she had split them, but that by doing that, they were so irredeemable, she was actually saving other people in society. Now, this is a very obviously messed up point of view that she's taken here. But you can see, compared to Jane with her statement that she just wanted to kill as many people as she could, there's a very different perspective on other people here that isn't present in the first one. So I'm going to wrap that up there, and wish everybody a happy Halloween. And I hope that you found this interesting. If there is an interest in this, I may talk about some of the other personality disorders out there and relate it to some of the other more infamous individuals that we run into in history. But there'd have to be a bit of an interest in that. Otherwise, like I said, I'm interested to see what you think. If you disagree with me, if you do agree with me. And other than that, have a wonderful afternoon.